Welcome GRD131, and I'm going to review the ex6 logo combo mishaps exercise. I started looking through some, and I think some people might have been a little confused in some areas, so I'm just going to go through and do it. Doesn't mean you have to do what I do, but some people were struggling with the combinations and maybe felt limited that you had to keep the font on one particular item of the logo and weren't switching them. So let me just go through this hopefully quickly. So I'm just going to start this right from scratch. I'm going to click on this link here, and this will go into my Gravit. I'll just save it, and I'll do another version of these, and I'll just try to go through them real quick, just so you can see what I'm doing here, because I think there's still some confusion about what to do with these, and also still some confusion about the rules. So what I'm going to do first, like always, is just save it to the cloud, and people did that already. Now, if you go back to edit your file, you can just edit your file. You don't have to re-give me a link. I don't believe. I think you could just save it, and when I go to it, I should see the updated version of it. So I'm going to go into 131, and I'm just going to call this Homa R2, because I did another one, I think, when I first started recording the video. So I'm just going to put a 2 after my name. And remember, I have to hit enter. Okay, so again, the premise here is that there's combinations that are breaking rules. Now let's look again at what these rules are, because I see people breaking the rules on other assignments too. And that means you don't want to be using two different serifs together, meaning not from the same family, but you can't use two different serifs together. This is two different scripts together. So this is breaking a rule. So my idea was use one of these. So if you like this font, stick with this font. If you like this font, use that. But you can use it in either place. So if you look at this and you say, oh, I really like that Parisienne font, but I want to use it up here with Karen's. You can do that. You can go up here and select Parisienne, and then at least you're maintaining one of them. So maybe you want to put Karen's in that. And I think somebody did that, and that's fine. Now, what you'd want to do down here, because you have a very decorative font, is you'd want to use something very simple. Now, I gave you that PDF sheet of simple fonts, so if you don't have to go looking through these, I don't want you going through hundreds of fonts looking through. If you want a simple font, then just use just use Archivo. Just start with Archivo, use Narrow, just go from there. Now, this is a little bit on the heavy side. Is there a light version of this? And there's not. That's the lightest version of this, although this doesn't look bad. And you might want to look at one of those that have like a light version. I think Roboto, not Roboto Slab, but regular Roboto, has a light version. And I'll just go into Roboto here, and I'll see if they have a light version. And they do. They have a light. And I'll make it a little bit lighter. And I'll make sure I hit this auto because it's breaking out of the box here. And now what I'm going to do is just highlight this thing and just scale this down a little bit. Now, I don't want to use anything heavy because this font is pretty on the light side. So I need to go with something fairly light and kind of make it small in comparison. So that's kind of working. And why am I putting it there? Well, it doesn't look right centered with this decorative K. That's why with these decorative letters here, we usually do something that's kind of going left to right. So we usually balance them off down here a little bit. Now, I'll talk more about the apostrophes, because there's ways to do the apostrophes, but it's different on Windows and Mac in terms of making that into a curly quote. But that's what I'd do with that right now if I was going to use that font. Now, I could use the other font. Same thing with Smithwood. Obviously, what's wrong here? Well, you wouldn't use a font like this for a public accountant, so I think I did this one before. So if you just change Henny Penny, I'm going to keep that one. And you could either do two things. Not breaking the rules is keeping it in this Crimson Pro, which I think this is. This is Crimson Pro regular. You could keep it in here. I mean, maybe even throw it in bold. It's the same font. You're just using a different style here, maybe semi-bold. And then maybe you want to put this in Crimson Pro Italic, or you want to use a sans serif font. There's one called Catamaran. It's a light font. Something like that might work. And I'll hit auto, and I might go a little bit smaller. I might center it in between. I might spread it out. Remember, we talked about tracking down here, and I'll just go 0.03 and see what that looks like. And I'll do auto again. And maybe I'll even go a little bit smaller and do auto, and do something like that. Does that work? That's fine. I mean, and you want to make sure you center these. So make sure you highlight these and make sure you center them if they're going to be centered. So that looks okay for now. I didn't put any kind of stroke on there. But if you are going to do a stroke, remember, I used another video where I said use the stroke of this so that it becomes, this gives more weight to this one down here and it doesn't get overpowered or look like an underline up here. So if you were going to do a stroke, I would go in here and put a stroke across here. Now, you can keep it straight if you just kind of draw it as straight as possible, but I'd keep the thickness of that very similar to the thickness of this catamaran font. So maybe at the most, I'd put this in 1.5 and see what that looks like. And go back to my arrow here, and then kind of separate this and move it down a little bit. Something like that. I mean, this is a little off. It's a little long there, so I might shorten it a little bit, but something like that. And again, you don't have to do that. This would work just as fine as if you kept it in this font, this Crimson Pro. So you could have kept it in this Crimson Pro. I think I did this the first time. And maybe you just put it in italic or something like that. Now, this way, I don't necessarily have to spread it out. It gets a little harder to read with the tracking spread out with an italic font. Not that it doesn't look that bad, but I'll just go back in here and put it to 0. Or actually maybe a little bit more. Maybe just a little bit, 0.02. I'll see how that looks. Just spread it out just a little bit. And maybe make it just a little bit bigger. And I don't have to use this line. If you're not sure about the line, get rid of it. And I'll just put this in here. I'll hit auto. I'll make sure I center them. And make sure you always want something standing out and something secondary. I've seen some of the exercise 7s, and people have very big secondary lines here. You always want this standing out. You want Smithwood standing out, certified public accountants being secondary. You want Karen standing out, jewelers being secondary. Here we have Vasco and Vasco. What's the problem here? Well, we have a scripty looking font and we have an italic font. They're too similar. They compete with each other. So which one do you want to keep? Well, I don't know. If you're going to keep this one, and I would probably recommend doing either this. Either you could take this one, and we'll see what this is first. Oh, this is Volcorn. So I might as well just stay in Volcorn. You could go up here and make that Volcorn. I think there's 2 L's in Volcorn. And then make it bold. They have a nice big bold on there. They even have a heavy. You even make it heavy. And I'll do auto. And this is Volcorn italic. And I'll probably make it smaller. So I'll just scale it down and do something like that. And it's regular italic. Let's see if they have a light. They just have a regular, so that looks okay. Does that work? It works as far as what we're doing. This stands out. This is secondary. That's what you want. Now, let me just undo this a second. I'll give you another option here. Back at step 1 here. Let's say you like this font, even though I think it's a little decorative for a attorney firm. Now, this competes with it because it has all these curly letters in it. It's too big. They kind of compete with each other. So what would you do with this? I'd take this and I'd put it in something like, I don't know, if you can't think of anything, just use Roboto. I'll go with Roboto because I know it has something. I'll use Roboto condensed. And I'll take it out of italic and I'll put it in light. And I'll make it smaller because it's a little too big right now. Now, the smaller I make this, the less it competes. I don't want this to compete. Now let me put on my auto. If I figure out a better way to do this. But I'll put this on auto. You could spread this out so it's a little wider if you want. I'll go down to spacing and put 0.04. See how that looks? That spreads it out a little bit. And that's fine. This is more decorative, and this kind of sets it off. Remember, this is the main person. This is the host. This is the co-host. This person shouldn't, or this element shouldn't get any attention. So it should just support the other one. So that would work, or the other version. You see what I'm getting at here? You want something to kind of stand out and something to be secondary. This is standing out, this is secondary, and they should work for the type of font. Now, that's why I use something very plain here, because this doesn't compete with that one. Now, let's look at Parisienne here. Now, I did not want this to be a capital R. It's only because when I was typing with caps, it must have got messed up. So if you retyped it or if you took it in a different font, it probably kept that R. That was not my intent. I don't want to have a capital R's just because I couldn't see it when it was all in caps. But right off the bat, it looks like some spooky font here. You would not want that with a salon. If you like this salon and spa down here, that's fine. Or you could put Parisienne in this, whatever you do. This is dancing script. Well, what if you put Parisienne in dancing script? Let's try it out. Okay, there it is. Now, this should not have a capital R. I apologize for that. It's just when I did it in all caps, I didn't know that was a capital R, so it should be like that. So now that you have Parisienne, and I'm going to click on this again, and I'll put on auto, and I'll make it nice and big because it's a small font. Now again, this would be the same thing that we do with this one up here. Because we have this very decorative kind of top part here, you would not want the same decorative down here. You wouldn't want anything that looks anything like that. So you'd want to take this out of dancing script and use something like, I'll put Libre Franklin. I'll see what's Libre Franklin, because these are just real basic ones here. Libre Franklin, and I'll use light. And I'll put on auto. I'll make it real small, and maybe I'll put it over here. And that's all I'd want. That's perfect. Now, I'm not saying it's great. I'm saying, but that's kind of what I'm looking for you to do. You want to make this stand out and that be secondary. Now, why make this so small? Because this is kind of light. You can't go real big with this, or it's going to overpower it. You can't have Salon and Spa, like that. You want Parisienne to really stand out. So what do we have to do? We have to make this smaller. And luckily, this will read nicely at a small size. Now, why am I moving it to the right? Why not center it? Well, let's look at the logo. Let's look at this. This has a capital P here, so this is creating some balance, some movement. Because you have a high end up here, this kind of balances off up here, where just sticking in the middle doesn't always do a great job of that. So it gives us some flow, and it kind of balances off the P. That's why we'd put that over there. So that would work. Now, you could just as easy put this in a more plainer font or a serif font and then kept that script font. We could have done that as well. I've seen some people do that, and it looks fine. Now, this one seemed to throw people off. And what you should have looked at with this is say, well, that's a nice font for forklift service, but this one really isn't. So whatever this is Roboto Slab semi-bold. Maybe you could even make it bolder. I would go up here and make that Roboto Slab and just get out of that Una. That's not really a good font with all those thin lines for a forklift service. So I'll go up here and go into Roboto Slab, since that's what I'm using. And I'll even go into the heaviest one they have. Here, heavy. Mitchell & Son. Look at that. Perfect. Mitchell & Son is nice and big and heavy. Now, what about this? Well, you can use something else, or you can try to use this. You could try to stay in the same family. Maybe I'll make it regular. Maybe I'll make it regular. But what's the problem right now? It's still too big. It still competes. So let's make this smaller. Now, does this work? It's starting to. That works okay. I mean, you could spread it out too. You could go down here to the character spacing, 0.04, and see how that looks. Spread that out a little bit. I'll hit auto, and that's not too bad. Now, I'm not saying this is great or anything, but you want to make sure that Mitchell & Son stands out. It's nice and big and bold and stands out, and this is secondary. You could just as easy put this in a sans serif font, like an Archivo, like a Catamaran or something like that, like a Roboto, just something real plain. Like we're not trying to get really detailed into our fonts, but just find plain fonts that work with it. So something like that would work. Now, Wally's down here, we have Sports Bar and Grill that's really plain. We have this, they're almost two sans serifs that are competing. This one's a little more decorative than that one, but it's really not a good font. Now, this is the one you could kind of have fun with. You could go into Wally's here and look for something, scripty. Even something like that would work. I just grab that. But you could find something scripty like Lobster or something like that. Now, obviously, there's issues that we'd have to deal with because of the Y coming down. That's always an issue, but I don't even care that much right now. We could always figure something out about what to do with Sports Bar and Grill. Make the ampersand smaller, make a dash or something. But at least doing this, you're kind of getting there. You're getting the combinations. That's what we're trying to focus on here, the combinations. And also size and also bold. It's not just the fonts, it's what's standing out. When I look at it from back here, I could read this okay. I can read this okay. I can read this okay. This is standing out, that's secondary. This is standing out, that's secondary. This is standing out, that's secondary. This is standing out. If you don't like this Wally's one, I think there's one called Lobster. That's a nice, like more fun kind of scripty font. There's Wally's in Lobster. I could make that real big. And then Sports Bar and Grill. Now, this is just a very basic Archivo narrow. Now, it's in the lightest font it can be. What would you do with that? Well, you could make it smaller. You could just scale it down a little bit to make it be less emphasized, and you could just center it underneath. It could be in a box or something, but don't get crazy with doing a box or anything. Now, this is weird because you could put it here, and if you try to do there, it makes it too long. I think I saw somebody trying to put it there, and it makes it too long. So even for now, if you just did something like this, that would be okay. I'm not looking for perfection, but I'm looking for these combinations. I'm looking to see something standing out and something secondary, even if it's just real plain. You can see a lot of times I'm just using plain fonts here to kind of support the decorative font on top. So I want to make sure that you're doing that. Some people were confused that maybe you couldn't change the other font, that they were leaving Mitchell and Son in the other font, but you could certainly just use one of those fonts. That was my idea, that use one of the fonts. One of the fonts of the pair originally was probably not appropriate, or they conflicted with each other, so you need to change one of them. Whichever one, would flip-flop them, I don't care, but make sure you maintain a relationship where something is standing out and something is secondary. Standing out, secondary. Standing out, secondary. Now again, these aren't perfect. I would probably not keep it in this particular font, in Croissant 1, but if I was going to use it, I'd make sure I use something very plain that helps complement that a little bit. So, and also in terms of your layout, make sure that you're centering things. If this is supposed to be centered, make sure they're centered. If this is supposed to be on the right, if this is supposed to be centered, make sure it's centered. This one, again, I'm not sure what to do with this Wally's. This is a tough one with the Y, and I realize that. And if you try to squeeze something in there, it can be tough in there. So that's why sometimes we may have to do something more creative with that. But that's fine for now. Even if you just did that, I'd be happy because you're getting the right combination. This is standing out and that's secondary. So that's what I'm kind of looking for this, and that's what I was kind of looking for. I don't know if anybody was confused about the rules of that, but I didn't want this to be something that was really super challenging, that you really had to go looking through all kinds of fonts. I just want you to maintain one of the fonts and just maintain a nice relationship between them, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Hopefully you can see that.